In the 80s, when I've written about this, I was rooming with Gloria Anzaldúa, who was a Chicana lesbian writer from Texas. And we were teaching in a program in Santa Cruz, a summer 3 week, I think it was 3 week program. It was called Women's Voices. And it was about it was a writing program basically. They had like 4 teachers, we were 2 teachers, and we shared a suite at Santa Cruz. And she always joked afterwards that the reason she really began to like me right away was that I looked like one of her uncles, which I didn't know was very flattering, but that's what she said. She would say this at readings. I don't know. I was kind of humiliated, but we talked a lot. I mean, she's somebody that used Spanish enormously, and she had a very heavy Spanish accent, though she was born here. And as someone once asked her, like, when did your people come here? And she said, well, about 500 years ago. And she was very offended. So we started talking because she was using a lot of Spanish and stuff. And I don't know, we had such very different backgrounds. We sort of introduced ourselves to each other. And she did ask me, how come I never used Yiddish? And I thought that was sort of an interesting question, since it had never even occurred to me. I mean, I think I used 2 Yiddish words up until then. Like in one poem I used the word Rebbitzin, and the other poem I used Bashet. And so I started thinking about it. And I started thinking about using it in my poetry. I know I'm known sort of for that. I have very mixed feelings about it because I feel it's almost in opposition. I feel like poetry is something that you really want to just let go and let flow and then see what it is. Whereas in thinking about using Yiddish in it is already an interruption of that to some degree, because to some degree it's an intellectual act, it's not natural. But I have played around with it. I have to say that I find it much easier, and it hasn't been as visible. I'm working now on a rather very long thing where it is quite visible. It's much easier to do into prose because you don't have that conflicting kind of, you do think much more about prose. And I also think about characters and how they speak and so on. So I am interested in that. But it's not easy, and it's not natural. I know people like it a lot, and they think I do it all the time, but I don't. I mean, it's almost rare. It has to click in some way, because you can't just, I mean, introducing Yiddish into a poem is not a neutral thing. It brings with it an enormous amount of baggage, and in some ways that could be just totally destructive of the poem you're trying to write. So it's a very complicated process, and there was a point, I think, when I think a lot of it was accelerated. I took my first trip to Poland. It was in '83. It was the 40th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and I went with my mother the only time she returned. And that had a profound effect on me also. I mean, I think that also pushed me more towards trying to reclaim a Yiddish legacy, because I was particularly moved by the cemeteries, which I saw, the 2 largest cemeteries that I saw were in Lodz and in Warsaw. And that, I think, also pushed me, because in some ways that trip and those cemeteries made very clear to me the Holocaust in a way that it hadn't been before, because the tombstones reflected the life that had been sort of destroyed in a very concrete way. I mean, it wasn't abstract words, it wasn't a photograph, these were really burial places of actual people in an actual life. And it was something, I once said it was like looking at a negative. Instead of looking at the photograph, you're looking at the negative. And And that was very profound. And all of that happened almost at the same time. I had just a couple of years before that left YIVO. I had just then met Gloria. You know, I mean, it was all sort of those early 80s years were very, very critical in some ways. It was like a critical mass of things happening at one time. And it's hard to attribute this thing to that. It was all happening at once. And I was also, my second book had come out. I was better known. People were pressing me. What should I read? What do you know? You know, I mean, and at that point, you know, I started reading about the Bund. I had never really read about the Bund. I just sort of absorbed it, and I started reading real books about the Bund because I felt like I was like this ignorant messiah or something, you know, that I couldn't just rely on my childhood memories about the Bund. I really wanted to know more about it, and I wanted to be more responsible and more responsive. And the same thing with the Yiddish, searching for Yiddish women writers was just great fun. I mean, it was like very pleasurable to be able to find this stuff and to say, well, here's some things, you know. So that was I think the 80s. It was a mix of a lot of things, I think, an integration, I think, of things that. At the time, I really wasn't that conscious of even. I was just kind of going with whatever happened to pop up. And that was when I saw Aaron and Sharon. It was also probably around 81, 82. I'm not quite sure. Maybe they'd remember it better.